All right. Hello, everybody out there in social media land. We are the Flint Public Health Youth Academy. I am Dr. Ken Key, and this is FIRE, and we are here to talk about things related to public health, to our community's health, and to our overall well-being. And so today, we decided that we were going to talk about some hot topics that are really trending throughout the country and throughout our local communities. And today, we really want to talk about the impact that voting has on our community, on our democracy, and on our health. And so this has been a wonderful topic that we've had several discussions internally as FIRE, but then the country is having these same discussions internally all across the country. I mean, this is what people are talking about. These are things that are meaningful to the community, and we really want to make sure that we have the opportunity to give a youth perspective to this topic. So on today, we're going to have Amir Brown, who's our intern. He will be facilitating. And real quick, let's kind of go around and just give shots out and introduce ourselves as the FIRE intern. So Amir, I'll start with you, and then you can pass it to someone else.
Hi, hello. As Dr. Keith said, my name is Amir Brown. I go to UVM Flint, and yeah, I've been a FIRE intern for about 3 years now. So I'd like to pass it on to Cruz.
Hi, I'm Cruz Duhart. I am a senior English major at Morehouse College, and I've been a FIRE intern for around the same time as Amir, 2 years.
Who you passing it on to?
I'm gonna pass it on to Cole.
Hi, I'm Cole Mays. I've been here for around 2 years, probably not. And I'm a senior in high school.
Who you passing it to, Cole?
Tomas.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tomas Teo. There we go. My name's Tomas Teo. I've been with FIRE for about 1.5 years now, and I'm a 12th grader.
All right.
And I'm gonna pass the mic to, let me pass it to.
Who? You went on mute first.
Khalil.
Go ahead, Khalil.
Hey everybody, I'm Khalil. I guess I'm one of the administrators for FIRE. I've been here since Dr. Key brought me on so long ago. Happy to hear you here and talk with everybody.
Pass the mic.
Oh, I'll pass it on to Tashay.
I'm sorry, you caught me in the middle of drinking something.
Okay.
I'm Tashay Brady. I'm currently not enrolled in any type of schooling yet, waiting for Mott to fix everything. But I've been in FIRE for, I believe 6 months, 7 months, I believe. Not quite a year, I know that.
Who you want to pass it to, Tashay?
Who hasn't gone yet?
Christian and Monisha and Kiera.
I'll pass it to Monisha.
Hi, I'm Monisha. I'm one of the, mentors / administrators with FIRE. And I've been working at MSU with Dr. Key since 2017. And I will pass it to Kiera.
Kiera?
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, it took a minute to get off mute. I am Kiera Wallace. I am one of the mentors. I think it was 2020. Dr. Key, was it 2020?
Yep.
Since I was brought on with you guys. And who can I pass it to?
You got Kayla and Christian.
Christian.
Hey, I'm Christian Mays. I'm at Mott for automotive tech in general. I've been here for a little while, so happy to be here again.
And pass it to our wonderful, illustrious Kayla.
You already know. Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Shannon. I am a sophomore at the illustrious Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, majoring in political science, minoring in philosophy, and I have been an intern with the Flint Public Health Youth Academy for 2 years, I'm gonna go with. Yeah. And I'm so glad to be with y'all tonight.
And the color is popping. The hair, love it. All right, everybody. So we're going to talk about voting. Again, the right to vote is the cornerstone of our democracy, but without the Voting Rights Protection Act, America is at a place where we are very vulnerable and things could easily change if we don't respect everybody's right to be able to vote freely without any suppression. And so we want to talk about what we see happening throughout the country on today. So think about the impact that voting has, one, on our democracy, second, how it impacts us as communities, the various communities, the sub-communities within the community, and then how does it impact our health, right? And so Amir is gonna facilitate this discussion, and take it away, Amir.
Hi, hello everyone. Nice to help facilitate this conversation with you. So I asked a few questions, also add in some really startling, stats and statistics in there because it's very, very shocking if you don't know. So first, so what do you think the relationship between voting and public health is in general? Like, what do you think it is? And also I can't really see everyone, so yeah. So Kayla, you can go.
I'll start us off. And so for those of us who might just be joining us for the first time, I want to start with like a definition of what public health is, right? So public health, as we like to say, I think this is a phrase coined by Asia, but public health is everything, right? Like every single thing in our lives is in some way, shape, or form touched by public health. Our individual health is connected to public health. Our community health is connected to public health, our health as a nation. Things like pandemics affect our public health because it is things that affect our ability as people to interact with one another and with the systems and institutions that exist in our nation. And so that's sort of just an overview of what public health itself is. Now, how is voting connected to public health? In so many different ways, right? Because voting is a very important way that we get to engage with our government. We live in a democracy, right? Which is like, which was once such a novel idea because we as individuals have the opportunity to directly impact the legislation and policy that happens, not only locally, but even at a national level, right? And so voting is a way that we as constituents are able to communicate to our legislators what public health issues are important to us. And through legislation, we are able to either improve in some cases our public health, or more recently, unfortunately, because voting rights are being attacked by legislators that we have put into office, unfortunately, it can negatively affect our public health as well.
Yeah, to specify a little bit more of what Kayla's saying, it permeates a lot of different things. Like anything that's policy or advocacy oriented, it has to do with public health. So when you consider, hey, I want potentially there be more resources like libraries or something involved in my community, voting is going to be an integral part of that process. But then when we step aside and move to the federal level, there's also the integration of, hey, I want these type of things to be impacted, like whether that be like Medicare or, things like that contribute to populations as a whole. And so voting is super important when it comes to public health, because the types of things that you want to be impacted in your individual life are going to be, factored in and controlled by things like your legislators, or through just things that you're voting on, like whether that be allocating money to a certain thing or project, or, it could just be as simple as the way that your state handles environmental issues.
Both great responses. Anyone else would like to go?
So I just
I
want
do
to,
want to.
go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I do want to read what Cole had put in the chat. Then Cole says, Simple notion, but voting can really apply the pressure on your mental health for reasons here and there.
Absolutely. And just to expand on what Kayla was saying about what public health is, to kind of lay the framework, public health is also where we live, what we eat, what we drink, where we worship, where we work. All of that is connected to our public health. So understanding that connection and then understanding the policy decisions that impact all of that really shows that direct connection between voting, policy, and legislation, and the overall health and well-being of one, communities, and second, individuals. So I just want to kind of, again, reiterate what Kayla was driving home with her point.
Very, very important to get that message across, because public health, it touches all areas of life. As you said, especially with voting, that can also really affect how we live our daily lives, quality of life, etc., so on and so forth. So there's some things, some very startling stats that I want to just put on everyone, to think about and really ponder. So voter suppression is one of like the biggest things that's really affecting us right now, obviously, as Kayla said. So across the country, it says 1 in 16 Black Americans cannot vote to disenfranchisement laws. So that's a very big sector, a very big piece that we're literally leaving out of the voter population. And there's all these different facts and stuff that also affect Latinx voters and also other communities as well. And so just put on you guys, like, how would you react to that specific stat right there?
I mean, it's disturbing. Like, to put it in a proportion that's lower than 20 is really frustrating, because when you start to bring that up into, like we were saying, federal and state level, that's a large population of people. Like, that's a substantially disproportionate amount. And so you have to sit there and wonder, how is that fair? And what type of things do people gain to silence that many people? Of course, there's some sort of, reason there. I don't want to get into those minds and try to suggest what that may be, but obviously that's helping someone. And that's not okay that, as a citizen, you're supposed to have these rights to vote and have a say in some of the things that go on in your communities. And that's being stripped from so many people. And of course, I have an issue with that, especially when it comes to being marginalized communities like the Black community and the Latinx community.
Shoot, to answer your question, Cruz, about why would people take such effort to try and suppress people's vote, I think it's, unfortunately, through time, it's really been obvious, but just to hold that white power, to be honest with you. Ever since, that's how slavery started. That's how these oppressive systems began, such as capitalism, because people try to retain and keep that power within a small group and enact these barriers to make it hard. So yeah, why wouldn't they try and enact and do voter suppression,
Yeah, and I just want to reinforce that, when you say that statistic, it is disturbing, as Cruz said, but unfortunately, it's not surprising. The system functions as it was meant to. When we began to vote, when democracy was formed, when American democracy was formed, as I said, novel as a concept as it was, it never was intended to be extended to all communities. The intention was for white men who were landowners to be able to vote, period. Everything that we've done since then has been an extension of. And so for me personally, unfortunately, it's not a surprise. What I find most disturbing is that when others hear statistics like that, they aren't emboldened to be more involved in the legislators that they are putting in positions to make decisions like this, right? Because we have legislators in office who make comments like, we need to pass these laws that are disenfranchising people. Some of them have been created because of ploys to frighten people to think that that for some reason our democracy is in danger of being infiltrated by who knows who, right? And so there's language that is continuously repeated and reinforced, like we have to stop illegal aliens, which is really just people who have come to this country, just like the settlers who came to this country. But that's besides the point. There's all this language about wanting to stop people who are not legally able to vote from being able to vote, right? But it's like people, they've never been able to vote. That's always been the case. And when you really look at it, and when you look at the statistics and you consider the data, there's not a problem. There is literally little to no evidence that we have had any voter fraud. Like at the state level, I think it's something like less than 2% that we've had on a national level. And so you really have to begin to ask yourself, who are we trying to block from the vote? It's not the people who have been voting illegally. Less than 2% of people are doing that. So then who are these laws targeting? And when you hear statistics like this, you see who.
And Caleb, the unfortunate part is that these people try to put these labels and call people illegal, you know, when the fact is they came here illegally. They changed our borders, you know? So that's really what's, but I know they always try to be like, oh, well, this is history, that didn't happen. And they always try to bring that up when it fits their narrative, so.
Well, you make a good point, Tomas, as well as you, Kayla. And then Cole put in the chat, it's just simply petty, right? What's happening. But here's the other thing. Kayla's point goes beyond, because oftentimes when we talk about discrimination and when we talk about like voting rights and things like that, it's often brought in a race construct, because we do know a lot of this started with race, right? The devaluing of people based on race, the original Constitution that, you know, Africans brought from Africa enslaved were 3/5 or less than human. But Kayla raises an issue that takes us back to the show we had on intersectionality, because it's not just race. Women were not allowed to vote, even if you were affluent and the wife of a landowner, right? White women couldn't vote. Women of color couldn't vote. Number one, because it was illegal for women to even own land back in the day. So when we think about that, when we think that this is not only something that impacts Black and Brown communities, but this is also something that could impact women. So if voter suppression can start to be rolled out on communities of color, are women next in general? Like, are they going back to what they once did before? And so these are the type of critical conversations that I think we must have. Now, of course, most people lie in that intersection, right, of race and gender and communities of color or marginalized communities, but it was also poor whites. It was poor white men. Mind you, these were landowners who could vote. So then now it goes back to what Dr. King was fighting for. People really get it mixed up, thinking that he was only fighting for the civil rights of Black people and brown people. It was called the Poor People's Campaign and the Poor People's Movement first, right? And so he was fighting for all of those who were marginalized, whether it was because of race or because of your socioeconomic status. And so as we think about the strategy being used currently in dealing with voting, who's next? If right now it seems like it's marginalized communities of color, but who's next on the docket or on the agenda? So those are things for us to consider as we engage in this conversation.
Very good topics put forth. Another thing I wanted to get into was gerrymandering, which is a very, very big, huge thing that's going on, where they basically they redirect district lines. So essentially, you can't, if you're not within that so-called district or whatever, you can't can't do nothing about it because they redirect it, and that's very tough for a lot of communities, especially that are not in, I would say the best, financial situation or anything like that. It really attacks them. So I'll just read you this. So the Consensus Bureau released data from 2020, and consensus is August 2021, triggering that once in a decade line drawing process in most states. So these new direct district lines will determine our political voice for the next decade. Like, this is some serious stuff. And also mostly affects people that are in, marginalized communities that don't have enough resources to really have any say in anything. So especially, what do you think are some ways that we can combat that in these different communities that have faced this problem?
So before anyone responds to that question, gerrymandering refers to political manipulation of electoral district boundaries. So that's what he meant when he said districts, with the intent to create undue advantage for one party or one group or one socioeconomic class. And so it can be gerrymandered so that a predominantly minority community or a predominantly poor community is still ran by someone who is well-to-do and who may represent a party that does not necessarily stand for the values that are needed to create equity for the people in those areas. And so I just want to kind of lift that so you get that understanding. And for those who are out there in social media land who are like, what's gerrymandering? So that's exactly what Amir is referring to. So could you repeat the question now, Amir? And then we can have
before you repeat the question, I want to, because look, let's give the folks the information. Let's really break it down. So as he said, it happens once every 10 years. So these are in census years. So every 10 years when we have the American census, which is why it's so important for us to fill out the census, this is how they redistrict our population based on our population sizes, right? Based on who says that they're here, based on who says that they live here. And so there are different kinds and forms of gerrymandering, right? There are different ways that they can do this. As Dr. Key said, oftentimes the goal is to split up the district in such a way that either there are two main forms. One is called packing, right? Where they will split up the district so that basically all of the voters of a particular type, for example, and you better, it's the visual for me. So for example, the first one is in such a way that it would be even, right? You just split it so that everybody gets split. But in the second picture, all the way to the right, you will see there are certain districts that are packed with blue votes. So they're like, you can have that district, right? You can win there. But there are other districts where technically blue should be winning, but red gets power because they've packed blue votes into other districts. So this is called packing and cracking. Packing is when they put all of the voters of a certain kind, for example, blue voters, which blue voters are oftentimes members of marginalized communities. But blue voters are concentrated into a certain district so that there are more red districts in a state that might have a larger concentration of blue voters. And so this is how it happens. This is why it's so important for us to be cognizant and for us to be aware of one, the census, which unfortunately won't happen for another 8 years, but 2, where our districts are and how they've split them and who our legislators are, and for us to bring this to their attention. Like, hey, you know what? I noticed that our district is split in this way when really it should just be split even. I'm an advocate that all districts should be squares. Make it a square, and who wins, wins. If we want democracy, if we really talking about it, why we got all these oblong shapes? These are not even shapes. Like, there are literally places, you all, I swear you have to look this up. There are literally places where it will be along a certain road or highway that they will gerrymander it so that, we're going to get along this road, we're going to concentrate it into one district. It's a mess. It's a mess. But please, Amir, please repeat your question.
Okay, so my question was, how do you think that we can really, try to stop the process of gerrymandering? I know it's difficult. I know it's very, very difficult because it's very, very complex. But I just want to hear some of your ideas of how we can probably slow down gerrymandering and districting off, places or, yeah. So go ahead with the comments. Tomas.
Man, first off, Kayla got me hungry talking about smacking and cracking and popping and talking about Rice Krispies. I'm hungry. But anyways, let me not get distracted from the point. Basically, she kind of just mentioned it by filling out the census and making sure that your demographic is represented in that district. And I'll let more people kind of discuss more about ways that we can kind of address gerrymandering. But I feel like a system we do need to definitely represent that's kind of larger and incorporates gerrymandering is the electoral college. What is it? Why is it so mysterious? And why, even though Hillary Clinton won, I'm not going to say his name, but how come the other candidate ended up winning even though he didn't get the popular vote? Why is that? Why? I wonder why. Because he had more electoral votes. So I feel like by breaking down the system of the electoral college, which wasn't, well, I don't want to misinterpret or misrepresent the information, but I know that they can, even though it's something about it said in the Constitution, it isn't the permanent system. So it can be overturned and it can be edited. But that's just a major tool as well to suppress the voice of people because, no matter the population, each state is getting the number of electors as the number of senators that they have. And I think something about representatives as well, which is giving more power to the smaller states, giving less, the bigger states with more population. It's overrepresenting the small at the expense of the large. And it's taken away from our democracy because we don't necessarily directly vote for these electors, for these people in the electoral college. So I feel like that's a major issue, that we need to address. And gerrymandering is just a small part of it too. It's like a big value pack of suppression cereals. And gerrymandering happens to be like the Apple Jacks. Man, I'm hungry, so I'm gonna stop. But
why the Apple Jacks though?
But I just want to say, Tomas, you bring up a great point, and let's remember why the Electoral College was created. This system of the Electoral College is ancient, and it goes back to why senators originally weren't directly elected, because they did not want to give too much power to us as citizens in a democracy. So what's really going on?
And I think Tomas picked the perfect cereal, Apple Jack, because it's trying to jack the election. Go ahead, Cruz.
Wow. Yeah, so going along with that, I think the electoral college is a valid thing to bring up because it kind of works in the same way that our districts do. There's not really an inherent reason why we should have districts. And what also bothers me about how the way that they're set up is not only do they disenfranchise in the case of, who gets to vote or how their votes are counted, but they also get disfranchised in where you go to vote. So it also can become a displacement issue of, I need to drive 2 miles away just to go vote while I'm already, I got work today and all these different things. And so it adds up this another element of, making it harder and difficult for those votes to get actually counted and done, And so my issue with it, my solution is kind of similar to what I think Kayla is hinting at is what's the point? What are they useful for? It should just be split down to even or not exist in the first place because it's supposed to be representative of that state regardless. It's so the only reason that they're useful is because we also have representatives for each district. But that being said, they should be correlate with how the map works, not just where people live. And, if I can, finagle it a certain way so that it looks like these people really like this type of person. No, that's not what it's supposed to be. And it really should be location based because that's the only way to make it fair. But that's suggesting that we care about fairness.
Look, and I just really quickly want to bring in the comments from the chat because we have a lot of them. So one, we had a comment from one of our audience members, Melissa Mays, who said voter suppression and silencing the voices of the people who will be living with or through specific legislation is why Flint is going into the 8th year of the Flint water crisis. Exactly. Cole says, true, it isn't just for a lust for importance, people can make a profit off of voter suppression and have been for so long. If the poor can't say anything, then nothing stops them from stealing from them. And Cole also says, man, that is difficult because voting against it'll get gerrymandered itself. So when you vote, sometimes it still gets gerrymandered. That's right. I said, let's remember why the Electoral College was created. Cruz says elitism. Cole says the Electoral College was created to prevent an ignorant mass from picking an unqualified candidate. Khalil says every state gets 2 senators, but a senator from Idaho represents around 1 million people, while a senator from California represents around 20 million people. And Tomas says the sad part is that we ended up getting an extremely ignorant candidate with the aid of the Electoral College. So the chat is blowing up. I just wanted to bring those things in. Oh, and Cole says voting against gerrymandering will get gerrymandered itself. Thank you, Cole.
Oh, and I also want to add, this is not just a specific political party that does this. Both of them definitely offer this up, and that's kind of why it continues to go, because it's a petty game. Maybe one side will have it, this decade, and because they did that, okay, now we need to manipulate it, and now the other side does it, and so it just creates this cycle and loop of manipulation that really shouldn't be.
So what can we do? I say we become more civically engaged. And let me be clear about what I mean by civic engagement. First and foremost, I do mean voting. And let me be clear about what I say when I mean voting. I don't mean voting every 4 years for a presidential election. I mean being serious about participating in the municipal elections that are going to affect you personally, and your councilmen, your senators, your congresspeople. So many people have been confused to think that the executive in power, aka the president, is the most powerful person in our federal government. You have been lied to. Congress has the power of the purse. Congress are the people that make appropriations, that determine things, legislation that will last in the book for years. So let us be clear in saying, not only do you need to vote every 4 years, you need to vote every 2, because there's an election. And not only do you need to vote every 2 years, there are local elections happening consistently. And I understand that can be overwhelming, right? Especially for our young voters who are oftentimes our least consistent voting bracket. I understand how overwhelming when you're freshly joining into this voting process, it can be to consistently have to participate. Like, man, it's another election happening? Yes. And you know what? That's a privilege. There are so many places where people don't even get where people would beg, would kill to be in the position to consistently be able to impact the legislation that is going to affect their daily lives. And so, yes, it is burdensome, and there are so many struggles to that, but we have to participate. But let me also say, by civic engagement, I don't just mean voting. I mean going to school district meetings. I mean writing letters to your senators. I mean emailing. I mean calling. I mean pestering. All of these things, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets oil. Do you hear me? And so until we continue to pressure and press at them, until we affect their money or affect the likelihood of them being reelected, because quite frankly, a politician does not care about nothing that you're talking about until you are affecting their ability to stay in office. And so until we really get serious about coming together and doing our civic duty to the nation, we won't affect change. And that's the unfortunate but truth of the matter.
And just as we highlighted earlier in this conversation, public health is everything. Voting is everything to achieve a lot of the things we want nowadays in this country. So just as Kayla was saying, vote locally. And just as we mentioned in our previous discussions about a new curriculum focused around the histories of our cultures, of brown and Black people, if we want something like that, if we want these needs, better affordable healthcare. We have all these wants, but if you ain't going to get out and vote, you're not going to get them. I'm sorry. You have to speak and you have to vote. You can't, I mean, yes, you can't just sit there, be upset and not do anything about it. Do something about it. And then if you don't think that works, they'll take the next steps. But trust me.
Very, very powerful, about powerful points. I want to touch on what Kayla said, that young people like 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, y'all vote matters. Like everybody's vote counts. It's not like they just say, oh, you're too young, go kick rocks. No, vote. You gotta vote. It's very important. And also, what she put in the chat was, and we need better people to run. Yes, that very important, because you see these candidates and stuff, they think anybody who with certain moral compasses can go out there and be a part of an office. No. Some of these people need to stop. You're right. It's really bad. Because you get for example, I don't know, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world. How she get voted? She got voted in. No. Okay, yeah. So
but here's the piece, Amir, though. We have to get people that in office that hold up democratic values, right? It's one thing to, like Kayla said, to think that it's going to be every 4 years with the president, but it's your local representatives. Just this week, Tomas represented the Academy, Flint Public Health Youth Academy, as well as the Greater Flint Task Force on COVID-19 and health inequities at our local city council meeting. And what they kept saying to us was, we're so glad to see y'all come to these meetings. Let your voice be heard. Speak out during public comment. We won't know unless you tell us, right? And so we do have folk that are voted and in elected positions who are saying this is the type of engagement we need and that we want, right? It's one thing to complain. My grandmother used to always say, if you haven't been a part of the process, don't complain about the process, right? And so we have to really think about civic accountability and civic responsibility as it relates to, as citizens, what is our responsibility to the democratic process? And so I'm thankful that you all as young people are seeing that now and are starting to have these conversations, because a lot of older people, older than you are not doing their civic responsibility. And the only thing that they do is hold people accountable when they don't like what's happening, but when they had a chance to change what's happening, they were not engaged. So again, kudos to you all for even wanting to have this type of dialogue, and then to connect this dialogue to public health, to medicine, and to community health. I think that is definitely an honorable mention for you all.
very, very, very good points. Yeah, and also if you think your candidate or your local school board or whatever is doing a good job, make sure you keep them in there. Make sure you do your part to help them stay in, because that's important. You don't want someone who doesn't really necessarily, reach your value point, and they're in there and then everything changes. No, you have to make sure that they stay in and be consistent. So make sure you do your research. There's a lot of resources out there. And in the end, I'll give you some resources that I use to look up all this information, different stats and everything. So, yeah. Also, I want to bring up a really good point about the different. This pertains to the 2020 election and so forth. The thing about the ballot boxes, like removing physical places where people can go and submit their ballots and votes. That was a very, very big topic a few years ago, and still is, because they're still trying to remove that and still trying to not let you go ahead and either vote. You can't really go to a physical box because some of them are removed. So I want to bring that topic up also. So what do you think about that, removing of the postal boxes and everything like that?
I mean, it's super intentional, and you can't say that it's not, because it's not just, oh, there's less of them. They also pick the most interesting ones to take away. And then a lot of the times, strangely enough, it'll be in centers of the community that they'll take them away from too. It's almost like they don't like the idea of people who are living in communities or bigger cities voting. They'll make them drive, like I said, just to get to a voting poll, it might take a couple of miles, but just to turn it in, like if you had a mail-in, ridiculous at times. And so that bars, a center of access in the case that if you can't have transportation, there's no way that you can turn these ballots in. The MTA line don't go that far. Or, whatever it might be, they'll pick the outskirts or they'll pick the points that are furthest away from the largest populations. And they do this on purpose. It's so that it's one more barrier to make sure that you feel inclined that maybe it's not worth it. But I want to also put out there, if people are going to go this much out of their way to hinder your vote, there must be some value to it. There has to be, or they wouldn't care.
Yes, Chris, I think you make such a great point. And I want to say, like, it would be so different, right? If they were doing all of this with a legitimate concern in mind, right? Like it would be very different if it was like, oh, our election has truly been like, oh my gosh, people from Russia are participating in our electoral process. Then you would, but anywho, I'm gonna stay on topic. Point being, it's intentional, as Cruz said. It's intentional. The laws that are just recently, there was a bill passed in Florida called the SB 90 that basically, that one of the part of the bill was that people were not allowed to hand water to people in line at their election, at their polling place. Why can't I come up with words? At their polling place within 150 feet. Tell me the purpose of this. Give me any other purpose other than to make it more difficult for people to vote. Because is handing somebody water going to make them more or less likely to vote for anybody? Probably not. But is it going to make it so that elderly people don't stand in line so long? Is it going to make it so that on a hot day in Florida, you're not going to want to stand in the long line after they close down the polling place that was closer to your house? You're not going to want to drive across town, stand in line for 6 hours, and not be handed water. This is not information. This is not saying you can't hand out pamphlets talking about the people that are on the ballot. No, water. They are making it more difficult in a democracy for people to participate. There is a reason, and it is not equally affecting all people. It is not equally affecting all communities. It is not equally affecting all voters. It is affecting very marginalized communities, poor people, people of color, people who work. Even the fact that do you know that in most developed nations, election days are holidays? Not in America, not here. So people who work, people who can't afford to take a day off, it's more difficult. When are most of our elections? Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, weekdays that people have work. When do most polling places close? 5, 6 times when most people who work full-time jobs and can't afford to miss work can't make it to their polling place. So then when that's the rule and the constraints that we have set for our voting days, and then on top of that, my polling place just got closed, it's not coincidental. It's not coincidental. Please do not be as naive to think that any of this happens by pure coincidence, because it does not.
So Amir, as you ask your next question, we have about 20 more minutes. We want to pivot also to the impact specifically to community health and public health, because we're really dissecting, I think, so with like laser beam accuracy, what's happening with the democratic process around voting and the different components, if you will, and the different mechanisms that are being manipulated. But we also want to talk about what's the big picture piece. How does it manifest at my address? How does that manifest in my body and with my health? And so we want to kind of pivot to that as well.
Yes, yes, very much so. That also another point that I think was in one of our talking points. This was probably a few weeks ago we brought up, but it was the idea of like public health dealing with your ability to gain certain pharmaceutical um, you know resources and stuff like that. That also goes in with voting and different types of systems that can really affect your health and affect you as a person individually also. Different things like your ability to get a certain medication or you to get insulin, for example. The prices, like depending on who you select or depending on what their views are, healthcare is a big deal. And a lot of what comes with this voting is a lot of stipulation in healthcare and the boundaries that are put on it. So just want to talk about that and really put that and put that on the table for y'all.
When you talk about healthcare, when you talk about student loan debt, when you talk about the water crisis was a great example brought up. When you talk about being in a global pandemic and what constraints are put on the ways that businesses are able to operate. When you talk about the workers, like what are the rules and regulations of how a corporation can work its employees, when you get lunch breaks, how often they have to let you sit down, how often you have, like, all of these things are controlled by legislation. And they just gutted, they are currently currently gutting the Voting Rights Act. All of these things are impacted by our ability to vote, because the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, is one of the things that I'm learning in my class right now. But not only is the Constitution the supreme law of the land, once a piece of legislation goes through both houses and is able to become law, that as well becomes the supreme law of the land. And so our voting impacts the issues, as Dr. Key said. What impacts my personal life? Your school districts, what's taught in your school districts. Critical race theory is a big topic of conversation right now. Whether or not they are able to teach accurate history is affected by legislation, and that impacts our public health. That impacts our mental health. People of color being able to see and recognize their contributions to the formation and foundation of this country impacts our mental health, impacts our public health, because it impacts our ability to continue to interact with our legislators, how well we are educated about our legislative process. That impacts how well we are able to transition as adults. There's a reason that they're not going into high schools and educating high schoolers about how to vote immediately. Because I'm like, if people start voting at 18, where should we start teaching people what our legislative process is? When should we start getting, because you can register, you can begin to be added, if I'm not wrong, at 16, you just can't vote until election, right? But no one's going to high schools. All of these things are intentional. All of these, there's a reason for all of this. And so the unfortunate part about it is, unfortunately, we cannot depend upon our national legislature to do this work for us. And so it gets to the point where we as community members have to band together with one another to educate and disseminate accurate information about elections, about how people get involved, about what the laws are in your state, especially for college students, because I know one of the obstacles to voting for college students, for example, for me, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I can't vote in Atlanta, Georgia. I vote in Michigan. You need to know your vote by mail instructions, your vote by mail restrictions. You need to understand. And if you are voting by mail, because this is the thing that they try to do too, right? They'll say, oh, you should vote by mail. But if your signature does not exactly match the signature that we have on record, we're throwing your ballot away. And if your supervisor of elections at your district is petty, it can match and they'll still throw it away. So you have to be very intentional. Look, you laughing, but I'm so serious.
Not the petty one, not the petty one.
They be petty. They be like, you wrote your A like this and not like that. And
Right. You got a curly Q on the end of your A on this one. Exactly.
So update your signature. Make sure that if you're voting by mail, make sure that you're registering to vote by mail in the correct amount of time. Make sure that you're sending your ballot in earlier than what they do. Not wait till the last minute. I know what the deadlines are. Make sure that you are sending in your ballot as soon as possible, because this is not a joke. It is not a game.
But you make a good point, Kayla, because like you said, you and Cruz, you all are from Michigan, but you're away in school. And so when it's time to vote, you can't vote in the state that you're in school. And Cole made a very good point in the chat. He said, it seems like we're being set up to fail. Oftentimes, that has always been how communities of color and marginalized community feel. Is like once we start learning the rules to the game, the rules change, right? And then it's always trying to play catch up and those things. And when we think about the connection between democracy, voting, and health, policy shapes everything. Policy shapes insurance, policy shapes income and the ability to acquire income. Policy shapes school. I mean, everything we think about, policy has a direct impact on that, and voting has an impact on policy makers. And that's really the direct connection. I think one of our Facebook comments was talking about how the Flint water crisis was literally an elected leader put someone in position to make decisions that impacted the lives, the health, and the well-being of people, and yet did not take into consideration what the ramifications would be on the people, and stripped the local democracy. The people had no say-so in what the decision was. And anytime you strip a people of their democracy, you're setting them up so not only will they be impacted, their health, their wealth, and this is an intergenerational issue, right? And so those are things that directly connect democracy and voting to health.
Very, very good points. I'd also like to put forth different like voting structures. For example, like you got your environmental bills and all other type of stuff. That's extremely important because especially locally, say for example, there's a factory that's trying to barge their way into your around your block or something like that, right? That can affect your air quality and air quality of life and everything like that. So you don't want to be breathing in those factory fumes from a plant that is put in across the street.
Amir, I need to give you I need to cash app you because you are preaching. We just got done talking about what's happening right now in Flint with a particular company, we won't say the name, that wants to put an asphalt situation that's like literally right across the street or kitty corner to a whole housing complex. And this housing complex is predominantly low. Well, it is a low income and predominantly minority complex, which means those children will be breathing in that toxic air, right? And there's historic patterns of this. We can go back to redlining. We can go back to looking at where the general facility of manufacturing plants were pushed and placed. And so that's a whole nother environmental conversation, but you make a good point because how is it connected to voting and decision makers? Zoning laws.
Yes, yes, very, very good point. And also, especially what that community has went through, especially our community has went through with the water crisis and stuff. You got kids that are still suffering from different types of physical health ailments, and you bring a factory in that's gonna affect their air quality. That's not right. That's morally wrong. And so different things like that, you have to make sure you vote on and reject those type of requests. Because they can just barge in and bring in all that, and you'd be like, oh, I didn't know we could eventually, vote on this for this to stop or this to end. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
that's a very important fact. Cruz, you got
And
something?
what's helpful is knowing what's going to be on that ballot beforehand, because it is broken down into multiple sections. And a lot of times, if you really notice, sometimes they do try their best to not explain which thing you're voting for. They'll just use a number. And so sometimes when they like really want you to vote for it, they'll like break down a whole debrief. But other times they'll just be like, form 1042, and you're just supposed to know what that means. And so recognizing that helps you, be more prepared in the case that, you will be able to fight for what you really believe in when it comes to, your community and types of things that you want to uphold and preserve. Because I have a real big issue with, a lot of these things like things that are bad for our environment, or juvenile centers being created and things like that, but we're not getting a lot of mental health resources, or we're not finding, additional programs for after school for children and things like that, that would also help and assist in bringing positivity to the community. It's a lot of negative, and it's a lot of things that are being done after the effect, after there's already an issue or a problem here. And then they're just saying, all right, let's clean it up now, after you've said that it's bad. But they're never going to do it properly then. You want to stop these things before they happen. And so we have to start showing that we care about these, rehabilitative or positive things in our community. And like Dr. Key was saying earlier, I think it was real wild that somebody was just like, hey, I'm gonna bully you up. I'm gonna call it an emergency manner, and I'm just gonna decide for you what's gonna happen. A lot of that has to do with, things like voting, like how our economy was set up. And these types of things can be supplemented or assisted off of that ballot. And, it really matters who's, really voting on anything on these things, because of course, depending on who you are, you're going to vote for certain things that are in your interest. So, the business owners that, are part of those corporations that's trying to slide up in your neighborhood, they for sure vote. And they dot every line and T to make sure that theirs doesn't get thrown away. And so you got to recognize, these are the type of people that we're combating against. But we still do have this potential and power to fight against it, but we have to be on top of our toes.
And a great resource, as Cruz was saying, for us to do this research and to be intentional about being ahead of the curve is michigan.gov/SOS. That's the Secretary of State's office. And if you go there, you can register, you can see your upcoming elections, you can look up how to vote from home, you can read about redistricting, you can read, I'm on the page right now, so I'm telling you the resources that are available. But there's so much great information there. It is michigan.gov/SOS. And from there, when you look and see, okay, do I need to set up so that I can vote by mail? Do I need to read to see because you may not even know when the upcoming elections are, because they're not that intentional about making sure that you know the dates and that you know where you're supposed to be going and that you know what's really going on. So after you look up what the upcoming elections are and who to vote for what, do some research about, okay, what power does this person have? What is it? What is this position? How does this position impact my life? What issues are we voting on right now? Do some research about those issues. What people are on the ballot as possible candidates for this position? Not just, are they a Democrat or are they a Republican? Because some of these people out here are Republicans talking like Democrats, or Democrats talking like Republicans. So please, I want us as a nation to get away from this idea that just because you're a Democrat, you're on my side, or just because you're a Republican, you're on. These are titles. These are titles. And one of the, I think, saddest trends, other than the fact that like we have continuously had like less than 50% at most of our elections, less than 50% of the voting age population votes at most of our elections. I think it was something crazy like 36.7% at maybe not the 2018 or the 2020, because we rolled out for them. we set records for both of those elections. But prior to that, I want to say it was something like 36%. But anywho, I think one of the saddest trends that we've been making as Americans is getting away from voting for people based on what their stances are and beginning to only vote for people based on where they stand. I'm talking to my folk now, because sometimes we vote for people because they say they blue and they really don't have us in mind. And they think, just like this is how Joey B was up in office talking about, if you're still considering not voting for me, you're not Black. You want to know why? Because the Democratic Party truly believes that they have our vote without having to earn it whatsoever. We need to get away from that. And I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm not telling you specific candidates. I'm telling you to do the research for yourself. And if you do the research and you decide that actually my interests align more with this person who says that they're Republican, I don't care if their ticket is red, blue, purple, pink, yellow, vote for them, because they meet your interests and they meet your community needs. And that's all I have to say.
Absolutely. And then as we wrap up, there was another comment when Kayla was talking about, I think Cruz, one of you all were talking about, just because it's a ballot number and they don't really break it down for us. Khalil put a good point that I was actually thinking at the same time, was that when you look at some of these proposals, like proposal A, proposal B, oftentimes you got to watch how it's worded, because voting yes, sometimes it's actually saying no, depending on how it's worded on the box. And voting no is also sometimes saying yes, because they can use those double negatives in it, and they play on the words, they play on that. And so you have to be very astute and make sure that you have conversations with folk so that you can understand what the actual proposal is saying. So make sure that you watch it. These are the tricks that happens, and this is how things are manipulated. Amir, did you have any final statement before we close out?
Yes. So let me just shout out, the websites that I use, to gain all this information, because very, very helpful. www.aclu.org is a really good resource. You also have, what I used was BrennanCenter.org. That's a very, very good, very good site that has really, really good resources and information. So yeah, basically, just capping off what Kayla said. Pay attention, and education on this stuff is very, very key and very, very vital to really determine what you want to vote for, how to get signed up if you're not already signed up. Just pay attention to what bills, laws, etc. they're trying to push forward or go to. Individually, everyone's different, so everyone has a different interest of what they want. So make sure that it fits you and what you want. So so I'm passing to Dr. Keith to close out.
So again, we thank everyone out there in social media land for joining into another episode of A Youth Perspective, sponsored by the Flint Public Health Youth Academy. Again, we hope this conversation was enlightening, thought-provoking, and helps to create momentum, synergy, and to mobilize you to really consider the impact that voting and democracy has on your health, your well-being, and your overall community. We thank you again for joining. We'll be here Friday after next at the same time on Facebook. We'll see you next time. Have a good evening.